I skipped over a name of a person who should be up here doing what I'm doing. We were supposed to do it last year too. But he's had a lot of personal tragedies. It's taken longer than a year to get him to come up here. And I'm hoping that he's recovered sufficiently from the latest situation in his life where his wife just passed away just a couple of years ago. But he's still got a good sense of humor. He's got a great Bob Steele story, I know, because he's been trading it with Ray Rice during our luncheon break. So if we please welcome Arnold D'Angelo, Arnold Dean. He made his first trip to TIC in 2 years just last week.
Thank you, Bill. I've been scribbling some notes there during the last couple of minutes. Every time I see somebody, I think of a story dealing with that person. I saw Joe Beret, John Stevens, as I walked up here this time. Reminded me of the story. Remember Reina Fiola and the news in Spanish? Many of you do. And the whole thing was in Spanish. It was on tape. So we never knew when it was starting, when it was finishing, or whatever. It's easy to cue up the start, but there's no cue at the end of it. So Dick Zwerkel was the guy who happened to be in the control room at the time. And as usual, Dick had reams of paper. I mean, he was solving flights to the moon and everything else while he was engineering shows. And John Stevens was sitting there doing his usual training with a crossword puzzle, and not paying any attention to what Raina had to say, and they said silence is the cue. So there was silence. John was busy with the crossword, and Zwerkel opened the talk back and said, El Cuo. How good, John, you don't remember that. It broke me up. It's a good thing I wasn't on the air. That's one of the few times I broke up, and it wasn't Ray Rice's fault. The first time Ray Rice got me, he introduced the weather preceding my sports at 6:20 on a Saturday. And remember how the only control we had on the mics then was on and off. That was at the request of Bob Steele. He wanted it no more complicated than on, off. That's it. So Ray finished the outro, as we called it, to the weather, and he said, next weather at 11:10 tonight. Now stay tuned for Arnold Dean and Strictly Sport. And of course I broke up and couldn't even go on with the show. But that was something that was used more. As a matter of fact, that was a very handy switch for Bob Steele. Anybody ever in the control room when Bob was, you were there, Dave, a few times, and I'm sure you were there, Dick. And you heard Bob, the way he always had a complaint about the continuity, the spelling in the continuity, something that was wrong somewhere. And he would always turn on the mic and do his thing and turn it off. And as soon as he turned it off, he would start telling Bob Downs or any of the other guys, before 8. Good, I made notes here, but I can't figure out what the hell they say. I had to tell Ray and a couple of the others, at the request of Mr. Hennessy, who loves to hear me embarrass myself with this story. I think I've told it before, but it's 2 or 3 years ago. By then you've forgotten it. Most people don't take 2 or 3 years to forget anything I've said. But anyway, I was working on a Sunday morning, and I was on with a guy named Alan Sagal, a wonderful guy who went to work for AAA and eventually passed away a few years ago. But a great guy with a silly, giggly little laugh that would set you off to laughing no matter whether you heard the joke or not. So he was doing the 12 o'clock news. I was doing Sunday Showcase, music of Broadway and Hollywood every Sunday morning. So at 10 minutes to 12, he comes in, sits down with the news, we chit-chat, the music is going on, and finally I said, we'll be back after the 12 o'clock news, and we'll have more of the music. With this, beep, 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 and I said, now here's the 12 o'clock news, and here's your reporter, Larry DeVere, or whoever. And at that point, he started the newscast. And, no, excuse me, it was Alan Segal, that's right. He started the newscast, and he did one very brief story. I was doing the log, catching up on other things that I should have done earlier, flipped the page, and I saw one of those, what we call donut spots. That's where they give you a little bit of music at the beginning, a lot of music at the end, and they give you this much copy in the middle. But they give you this much time to read that much copy. They never, ever should have been done live. They should always have been recorded, but of course, we always work live. And I had not had the privilege of looking it over, so all of a sudden, as he said, more news in a minute, the intro played, and I came on, and then I realized I had problems. The first line was, ladies, this is the sale you've been waiting for. Now's the time for you to stock up on Dickies. All the Dickies you could ever hope for. We have Dickies in every size, small, medium, large, and extra large. And in every color. They're white, yellow, green, and black. I could have added the blacks are at the extra large, but I thought better of that part. And by then, Alan Segal, who is giggling all the way through it, is now not even pretending he's not laughing. He's pounding on the table and laughing at heart and stuff. And I figured this time I've gone too far. I'm sure I'll get fired. But it was a Sunday. I guess all the executives were off duty because I never heard a word about it. And Don Levy's back room didn't even cancel. We were talking about, oh, let me mention Ray Rice. He had another one for me. I used to do Meet Me on the Plaza, remember? And one day he came in, and again, he always liked to get the funny line just before you were going on the air. So that would linger there and you couldn't start. The one time he came in and said, you know, Aaron, I hear from more people in our Hispanic audience who say that yours is a wonderful show. They love the music you play on Meet Me on the Plaza, and I think it would be a great service to them if one time you might just say for them, now stay tuned for Meet Me on the Plaza. And he left the room. And I couldn't start the sports. I looked in the control room and I went, spot! We were talking about things like parolee. That was the word they pronounced parolee here. And there were other words for which they had our own unique pronunciations. They also had strict limits on what we were allowed to play as far as records are concerned. Now, when I did the Plaza show, if you remember, and Bill did the show before me, where, Bill, you remember this, I'm sure. One of the great classic records of all time was Bunny Berrigan's I Can't Get Started, right? Yeah, we were not allowed to play that. And I listened to it over and over, wondering, why can't we play it? It doesn't mention drugs. There's nothing about it that would forbid its being on the air. So I went to Bob King, and I said, why can't we play I Can't Get Started? He said, well, because. Doesn't it make you think that you're on a date and you can't get started? I said, no, it doesn't make me think that. And he said, well, I think that it's the way other people would be affected. So I went and played it for Ross Miller, and Ross said, that's the silliest thing I ever heard. It had been crossed out with a grease pencil, but we went ahead and cleaned it up the best we could. We went ahead and played it on the air after that. I had a few run-ins with Bob Steele. I liked Bob, I admired him, and in the years after he retired, we became even friendlier. Every now and then I'd call him up and say, what are you doing? Let me pick you up. Let's go out and get some lunch. I'll take you over and we'll have a bite to eat and talk over the good old days when we were young and brilliant and kind of forgotten were some of the tussles that we had had in the past. Like one time, his son, he didn't like it when you did something funny on his show. Bob felt, it's my show, I'm the one who will be funny. You just do it straight. He didn't like weathermen who came on and did verses. He didn't like Charlie Bagley for that reason. So every now and then I couldn't help myself. I defied that. For example, one time he said I had done the sports. Oh, I was substituting for Phil Steele that morning. And when Phil did the sports, remember, Bob would introduce him and he'd say, good morning, Phil. And Phil would say, good morning, Dad, and go ahead and do it. So Bob introduced me to do the sports the day I was filling in for Phil, and he said, now here's Arnold dealing with the sports. And I said, thank you, Dad. Whoops, wrong Saturday. So he was already upset. Then I gave the race results from Stafford the night before, in which the winner, as usual, was a driver named Reggie Ruggiero. Now, if you follow racing at all, you know he won all the time. Big name in racing in the state. Reggie Ruggiero. So after I finished, he signaled for a commercial. He said, how do you spell that, Ruggiero? I said, it's R-U-G-G-I-E-R-O. Ruggiero. He said, you're even Italian. I'm ashamed of you. You should know it's pronounced Ruggiero. And I said, you know what, Bob? You know that. I know that. But unfortunately, the Ruggiero family doesn't know that. And for years, they pronounced it Ruggiero. I said, I know them. They have a garage in Rocky Hill. They call themselves the Ruggieros. They answer the phone Ruggiero. And he didn't like that answer at all. He said, when you give that name from now on this show, his name is Reggie Ruggiero. And I said, okay, Bob, if you say so, but I'm not one to sit still for things like that. From that day forward, I never once mentioned that name on my show again. I fixed that Steele guy.